I'd like to welcome you to Dublin Orange Hall. This building was built in year 83, 84. Our old building is next door, which was sold then and we moved in here. It's quite small, but nonetheless, we're still a core of Orangemen in Dublin and we keep the tradition going in Dublin. And the focus on tonight is inviting Quincy Duggan, the historian, down to give a talk on loyalism and Orangeism in Dublin in 1916 and to reflect on that element of that period of Irish history. So I'll hand you over to Quincy and for the next hour or so.
Thanks again to the Dublin and Wicklow Loyal Owners Lodge for the invitation down here tonight. I'm an Orangeman myself from mid-Armagh, County Armagh, and I have a great affinity with the tradition. This presentation will not keep you too long. I have changed it about a wee bit to best suit the subject matter and what information is available. So I've moulded it slightly into a different Dublin. Loyalism in Dublin City from 1886 to 1921. So loyalism in Dublin City through the period of the four Government of Ireland Acts. Now, on the 8th of April 1886, Liberal Prime Minister William Gladstone presented the Government of Ireland Bill to the House of Commons. And despite it being defeated just 2 months later, it triggered a reaction across the island of Ireland that would have consequences for many years to come. Those previously already dedicated to ensuring that the Union would be maintained now took on the task with a newfound determination and zeal. In August of that year, August 1886, the Pall Mall Gazette in London ran with the headline, "Preparing for Civil War, the muster roll of the Orange Army." Underneath and within the pages to follow, it outlined a highly detailed military structure based heavily on a British system. It listed cavalry, engineers, artillery, rifles and infantry, and actually went as far as defining where they were recruited and based. A Grand Commander-in-Chief would command over 4 divisions in Ireland, each of which was subdivided into brigades, regiments and sections. An Orange Army against Home Rule in 1886. Now the bulk of this army was geographically confined to the province of Ulster. However, the 4th Division stretched well beyond its limits. Alongside formations in Wicklow, Kings County and Cork, which was described in the document as South Derry, its 1st Brigade had a further 3 regiments, between them claiming over 1,800 men, alongside a note that returns were not yet complete. The 3 being the 1st Dublin Regiment, the Trinitarians, the 2nd Dublin Regiment, St Stephen's, and the 3rd Dublin Regiment, Phoenix Park. 3 Orange loyal regiments in Dublin. Now there's no doubt that at this point, in this early point, in what would become a Home Rule crisis, the Orange Army referenced was primarily a paper exercise. But what it did illustrate very clearly was a guide to the important locations of loyalists in Ireland. And within that, Dublin was central. Now, the 1861 census listed almost 23% of Dublin City as being Protestant, in excess of 56,000 men, women and children. Now by 1881 it had declined to 47,000, which in line with population increase otherwise saw them reduced to approximately 19%. A small percentage of the population, however a significant one nonetheless. Within 1880s Dublin, it still was a thriving and almost totally self-contained community. As R.B. McDowell observed about Southern Protestantism of the period in general, Dublin Protestants could avail of work and play, education and worship, and even read their own newspapers, with interaction outside of their own number very, very minimal. A central element of this overarching community was Orangeism. An Orangeism that after several decades of decline had taken on a new life with the birth of the Land League, and in particular immense resentment among the Irish Protestants at the newly defined boycotting. A very, very strong motivation for recruitment. Now, the city of Dublin Grand Orange Lodge in the 1880s boasted over 4,000 members. A membership actually on a par with North Armagh, the ancestral home of the Orange Institution. Now, parading had almost been deemed by the Dublin Orange men as an unnecessary burden since the early 19th century. However, orange services in the main churches and cathedrals and gatherings on the prime Orange anniversaries, such as the anniversary of the Battle of the Diamond in September and King William's birthday in November, were well supported. The 12th of July annually saw a pilgrimage of Orange families from Dublin City to Belfast and other parading centres in Ulster. But it also annually maintained its own celebrations on a night always previous to the iconic date. Each year, upwards of 2,000 people would pack the round room of the rotunda, with the walls lined with Dublin Orange banners, and the assembled throng partaking in tea before hearing speeches from their leaders, followed by dances into the night. The established custom of the gatherings was to begin proceedings by actually parading around inside the massive hall in true Ulster fashion, accompanied by either the Dublin Loyal Fife and Drum Band or the Dublin Orange Brass and Reed Band. Now, parading, while not a core focus locally for Orange men, did actually take place on the city streets, and indeed managed to do so unmolested as late as 1914. That year, when the train that had been specially commissioned to take Dublin lodges to Belfast returned to a main station at 10:30 p.m. that night, the brethren formed into ranks and, accompanied by their bands, walked to Rutland Square, passing through Abbey Street and O'Connell Street on the way. Now, one young Orange man was reported as later being attacked on his way home, but it also was reported that during the parade itself, various bodies of police were stationed along the route, and that their intervention was not required at any stage. Now, given the strong Orange presence and influence, it is unsurprising that the expression of views on ongoing events in Ireland, political and otherwise, in the city took on a very forthright dimension. In January 1884, placards were said to have been pasted extensively throughout Dublin, encouraging a mass demonstration against the activities of the Land League. Addressed and headed to the Loyalists and Orange men of Dublin, the posters requested that thousands should assemble at Ballsbridge at 11 a.m. on the 27th of January, where they would then march to meet further followers from Dublin County, and then march again to the scene of what it defined as a rebel meeting, a Land League meeting. Other notices confirmed that the call for this counter-demonstration was indeed a genuine one, with several lodges memberships patrolling the route in advance. Militaristic terminology was apparent, with loyal horsemen and bicyclists particularly said to be welcome to relay orders along the column of the march of the main body. The prospect of confrontation and serious disturbance eventually, and not surprisingly, took precedence, and the gathering was cancelled at the very last minute. A contingent of 100 loyalists, described as loyalists, did attend, but only to inform those that arrived of the development. What that particular affair did illustrate and underline was that in 1880s Dublin, effectively, Orangeism was synonymous with loyalism. Despite that cancellation, there was undoubtedly confidence and strength within loyal Dublin. Manifested, first of all, that June by the launch of a plan to construct a new grand Orange Hall in the city. An Orange Hall for Dublin and an Orange Hall for all Ireland. An appeal for support from loyalists throughout the United Kingdom was drafted, and among the first donations were the then astronomical sums of £200 from the Earl of Erne and £100 from Edward Cecil Guinness. The hall would eventually be constructed alongside existing premises owned by the institution in Rutland Square, now Parnell Square, in the city, and be renamed the Fowler Hall in memorial of in honour of a stalwart city Grand Master John Fowler. Those Rutland Square premises were already the focus of regular attack, and the new hall would be even more so. The occasion for a demonstration for Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee in 1897 saw a particularly aggressive onslaught, with raiding and attacks on the hall part of anti-monarchy demonstrations organised by, among others, James Connolly. In years to come, it would be on the receiving end of considerably more than just the broken windows it received on that occasion. In 1892, the city hosted a massive Unionist convention for the entirety of the Unionists of the provinces of Leinster, Connacht and Munster, with the city's focus for the Unionist cause across the south and the west underlined by the attendance at its 12th of July commemoration that year. Alongside the officers and members of the City of Dublin and County of Dublin Grand Orange Lodges, districts represented were Carlow, Wexford, Castlecomer in Kilkenny, Roscrea in Tipperary, Parsonstown in Kings County, Shinrone, Cloughjordan, Dundalk and Longford. By 1893, Ulster Unionists and indeed Cork Unionists had organised the Ulster Defence Union and the Cork Defence Union to mobilise against the Second Home Rule Bill. While in Dublin, the Loyalist and Orange focused stayed centre on the Irish Unionist alliance. The City Alliance was bolstered by the presence of its national office in Grafton Street, but numerically it was not short of members. Every ward was organised into committees, with members willing to work for the Unionist cause numerous. And the always Unionist Dublin University parliamentary seats, alongside them, there were also Unionist parliamentary victories in 1892 in South County Dublin and in 1895 in St Stephen's Green. By 1911, the Dublin County Borough was maintaining its 1881 population level. its Protestant population level of approximately 47,000. However, this was within the context that the Roman Catholic population had risen by over 50,000 to 253,370 people. Despite this, the concentration of Protestants in certain areas, particularly South Dublin, ensured they maintained some political representation at council levels. The suburbs of Glasthule and Pembroke were each over 30% Protestant. Kingstown East was 35% Protestant. Both Rathmines East and West were almost 40% Protestant. And in the Monkstown ward of Dublin, Roman Catholics were actually still, in 1911, a minority community. Other patterns of decades long since gone still remained, and in the fields of law, banking, teaching and engineering, Protestants were indeed disproportionately represented. In 1911, the Ulster counties of Cavan, Monaghan and Donegal contained 70,000 Protestants. Dublin City and County combined had just short of 100,000 Protestants. And it was in this context the Dublin Loyalists entered, as it would eventually come to be known, the Home Rule crisis. In February 1912, at an anti-Home Rule meeting in Fowler Hall, Mr H.T. Barry, MP, stated to a massive crowd of Dublin Orange men that the Loyalists of Ireland were going to stand or fall together. All of the depth of feeling against Home Rule in Ulster was replicated in many areas further south, and with that feeling, the same determination to resist by all means necessary surfaced. As in Ulster, Unionist clubs were a focal point for some of the most forthright pronouncements, and indeed planning in terms of resistance. The Kingstown and District Unionist Club in South Dublin in June 1912 discussed the possibility of forming a rifle club and a suitable location to drill men, sometimes referring to it as physical culture. By July, they had procured the grounds of Monkstown Park School for the purpose, with their first drill scheduled for the 9th of July. Now, the type of pressures on Southern Unionists and Dublin Unionists in general were illustrated in the September minutes of the club, when the Vice President informed the meeting that the Daily Mirror had offered to insert a photograph of the club at drill. A discussion followed in which it was raised that such a course of action would be inimical, harmful to many club members, and a vote was taken with the majority of members against the idea. In November 1913, post-Covenant, the city hosted another mass anti-Home Rule demonstration, this time an Irish Unionist Alliance event for the Unionists of Connacht, Munster and Leinster. Edward Carson and Bonar Law being the main speakers. Over 3,000 delegates attended and heard addresses by representatives from every county south of Ulster. The run-up to the rally, probably quite deliberately, saw another announcement through the print media, headed Dublin Volunteer Corps. The Irish Times of the 10th of November stated, "While Ulster is preparing to resist Home Rule by force of arms if necessary, and is busy building up a great citizen army, the spirit of militarism that has gripped that province and fired the enthusiasm of its young manhood is also at work in Dublin." The Ulster Volunteer Force had deliberately been constituted solely to those of Ulster birth, it initially being a prerequisite that all members had to have signed the Ulster Covenant. This limitation meant that obviously units of the UVF outside of Ulster boundaries would be difficult to form. The Dublin answer was to form their own anti-Home Rule Corps, the Loyal Dublin Volunteers, a direct initiative of the City of Dublin Grand Orange Lodge. In 1913, the City of Dublin Grand Orange Lodge was divided into 3 separate districts, subdivided into a further 23 private lodges, with a membership numbering in excess of 2,000 men. A further 8 Orange Lodges existed on the periphery of Dublin, organised within a County Dublin Grand Orange Lodge. Now, the Wesley Loyal Orange Lodge 1703 Dublin, where the records still survive, was very typical of its peers. Its roll book from 1898 to 1917 listed 202 lodge members, with, accounting for deaths and resignations noted, its active membership in 1913 over 130 men. Alongside this male Orange institution, female lodges were numerous, apparently at one point even actually overtaking the Orange institution, the male Orange institution, in terms of membership. With the other, while the other loyal orders most common in Ulster, the Royal Black Preceptory and the Apprentice Boys of Derry, too, both had a presence in the city. In April 1913, Dublin No. 3 District brought forward a motion to the monthly City of Dublin Grand Orange Lodge meeting. It resulted in a general motion being passed by the entire meeting present, being that a volunteer corps be formed in connection with the City and County of Dublin Orangemen, that members be properly enrolled, each member who can to supply their own rifle, and that all private lodges be called upon to contribute liberally to a rifle fund to aid members who are unable to purchase their own rifle. When announced in the Dublin Daily Express, the main Unionist newspaper in Dublin, and the Irish Times, the goal of this corps was stated as primarily being to preserve the civil and religious liberties of Protestants in Dublin and the South. But more ominously, it also mentioned civil war. In such event, the men would be ready for service, with arrangements being prepared to transport the families of the volunteers to parts of Great Britain whilst they were active. Other preparations included the separation of the greater Dublin area into districts, and intelligence gathered across the area accordingly for future utilisation. Companies had been formed, drill instructors appointed, and drills were taking place in some areas 3 times a week. A musketry course was underway, and across South County Dublin and Wicklow and beyond, many other bodies had been formed and were operating in the same fashion. Initially limited to just Orangemen, eventually demand from others wishing to join extended the membership base. At its peak, the Loyal Dublin Volunteers boasted a membership of some 2,000 men divided into 2 battalions, many of Ulster birth, but the majority of volunteers were Dublin born and bred. For those interested, there is an original there's an original Loyal Dublin Volunteers badge. There's actually several here if anybody wants to see them. From mid-1913 right up to the outbreak of the First World War, the unit was drilling weekly under the overall command of Colonel Henry Maxwell, the Grand Master of the City of Dublin Orange Order. Maxwell was a member of LOL 440, the Cumbernauld Orange Lodge, and had served with the Black Watch in South Africa, as well as commanding its 2nd Battalion on active service in the Punjab and Indeed, Maxwell would again serve in the Great War, and his name is noted on the Dublin Roll of Honour in the corner of the room. Maxwell also took command of the 1st Battalion, which was designated the Dublin Battalion, with the 2nd Battalion encompassing those areas on the southern fringe of the city and stretching into North Wicklow, commanded by Sir Frederick Shaw, formerly of the 5th Battalion Royal Dublin Fusiliers. Other officers involved in the Loyal Dublin Volunteers included its adjutant, Captain William Thomas Hempenstall, and Solicitor Francis Crozier, who would eventually rise to the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in the 6th Battalion Royal Irish Fusiliers during the Great War. Companies were organised on this geographical district basis. Examples being F Company of the 2nd Battalion were Bray, L Company, Rathmines Battalion, or Rathmines Company of the 2nd Battalion as well. Now, its commitment against Home Rule was every bit as staunch as its comrades in Ulster. As late as July 1914, a meeting in the Metropolitan Hall in Dublin heard resolutions from the city's Orangemen to risk all in defence of their rights, and called on leaders to take whatever steps they deemed necessary. Lord Farnham, Cavan, told the audience that the loyal volunteers of Dublin would be a timely reminder to the government that there was no way out of the muddle into which they had got the country except by an appeal to the general electorate. Loyal Dublin Volunteers Commander Maxwell told those assembled that the government had not moved against them and others drilling because they did not dare to move against them. Same meeting also heard how Dublin had a large body of disciplined and armed Orangemen, full of grim determination. Those in attendance were told in no uncertain terms that the loyal Dublin Volunteers would back up the Orange resolutions. The same series of events unfolding in Ulster, however, also affected Dublin, and with the outbreak of war, significant numbers of the corps enlisted. At an inspection of the Loyal Dublin Volunteers on September the 14th, 1914, by Sir Frederick Shaw at his domain at Bushy Park, Turrenure, the volunteers assembled were told that already 300 men from the Dublin Battalion alone had enlisted, whilst a further company were being gathered to join with the Ulster force. Up to 80 members had already joined almost instantly on the outbreak of war with the Dublin's PALS battalions, and more followed. The Ulster force referred to those who had joined the 9th Battalion Royal Enniskilling Fusiliers. That battalion of the 36th Ulster Division formed for the County Tyrone Ulster Volunteer Force. And within it, it had one entire platoon in its C Company, consisting totally of Dublin men. And with it, the battalion had the highest proportion of Southerners by far of all battalions in the Ulster Division. A William Crozier from St Stephen's Green in Dublin applied for a commission to the 9th Battalion on the basis that he had drilled for 11 months with the Loyal Dublin Volunteers. Officer commanding the 109th Brigade of the 36th Ulster Division, Brigadier General Hickman, endorsed the application, stating that this gentleman is quite the right stamp. If appointed, he will be serving with and commanding some of the men he has trained during the last year, cementing the Loyal Dublin connection with the 36th Ulster Division. At the end of September 1914, on one day alone, 60 men are recorded as leaving Fowler Hall for Finner Camp to join the Tyrones. The war signalled developments in the Corps, with an estimated 600 of its 2,000 members enlisting. The Loyal Orange Lodges of Dublin themselves eventually would reveal a roll of war honour after the war that consisted of well in excess of 300 members who had enlisted. As the emergence of an Ulster solution to the Home Rule crisis became apparent, the determination of Dublin men and Southern Unionists in general to fight Home Rule understandably began to take either a back seat or take a different form. For many, the focus for fight simply changed. At a general meeting of the Loyal Dublin Volunteers in August 1915, it was proposed that they affiliate themselves with the Irish Association of Voluntary Training Corps. The VTC were a home guard style organisation officially formed across the British Isles in November 1914, and the Irish contingent numbered just in excess of 2,000 men, with bases in Dublin, Cork, Belfast and a sub-base in County Louth. At that meeting, T.H. Liddy, who was at that time the Deputy Grand Master of the City of Dublin and the District Grand Master of District Number 3, stated that the Loyal Dublin Volunteers had already done such good work that they should be recognised by the government. Those that were left behind would do their best to help their government and the country in this crisis. To this end, it was stated that between 200 and 300 Loyal Dublin Volunteers immediately signed up, making those men effectively a de facto reserve army unit. Now, ironically, it was voluntary training corps in which the Loyal Dublin Volunteers enlisted that would be the sole voluntary training corps in the entirety of the British Isles to actually see action during the Great War. The Easter Rebellion of 1916 saw the VTC assisting regular troops in engaging with insurgents, with 5 of their number losing their lives. The VTC, the Voluntary Training Corps, were at times referenced as Loyal Volunteers. And while there is a disagreement on the actual meaning of that term, some choosing to interpret it as meaning that they were Loyal Irish National or Irish Volunteers, on several occasions they were directly referenced as being Loyal Dublin Volunteers. And as an aside, but it perhaps gives an insight, 4 of the 5 of the VTC that were killed in action during the rebellion were Protestant. Now, during the rebellion itself in Dublin, little record remains of the activity or even reactions of local loyalism and Orangeism. The surviving records of City of Dublin Loyal Orange Lodge District 3 shows they had no meeting in May 1916, while the City of Dublin Grand Orange Lodge was not able to resume its meetings until June. And within both sets of minutes, there's only a cursory reference to the rebellion. City Grand Lodge did pass on condolences for the murder of the son of one of its members, a brother Morgan, during Easter week. However, clues to other deaths or involvement within the ranks are more scant. One of the strangest stories of Easter week does emanate from an Orange source, however, and ironically also involves a Northern Orangeman and Loyalist. David Norrie, General Secretary of the Apprentice Boys of Derry in Londonderry City, and Dublin Orangeman and Orange Hall caretaker George Parker had been in the Orange Hall on Easter Monday. David Norrie from Londonderry had been visiting Dublin to constitute a new branch of the Apprentice Boys of Derry. They had been caught up in the violence and had been confined to the Orange Hall until Easter Thursday. On Easter Thursday they left the premises that evening, hoping to get in contact with somebody to get further out of the city, when they were arrested by soldiers, and after a short time actually found themselves incarcerated in Kilmainham jail. They were in Kilmainham for 9 days and then found themselves actually shipped to Holyhead along with hundreds of other Easter rebels. It took several weeks for representations to filter through for the two men to eventually be released. Following Easter 1916, things would never be the same again for the Dublin Orange men and Loyalists. But many refused to simply become a forgotten or silent part of the city. As late as July 1919, a 12th of July commemoration heard the proposal from the chair that the Dublin Battalion of the Loyal Volunteers should be re-established, just clarifying in his comments that drilling and discipline were good for physical welfare. When the Civil War between pro-treaty and anti-treaty elements of the IRA erupted in 1921, the Orange Order was forced out of its home in Fowler Hall. Anti-treaty IRA seized the building, at first very deliberately and ironically using it as a refugee centre from the north, and later used it for a time as their headquarters. In the process, destroying many important documents relating to both Orange history in Dublin and the Loyal Dublin Volunteers, and indeed records seized were used to intimidate many Orange men from the city. This was to signal a de facto Orange exodus from Dublin. With the last Orange procession, 1938, attacked as it made its way to board trains to Northern Ireland for the 12th demonstration. In June 1935, a Dublin Board of Works employee was among a group working in part of the Dublin GPO, the men having been assigned to remove presses from the cellar of the GPO Customs Parcels section, 10 Parnell Square. When several presses were removed, however, some mortar appeared insecure and when touched collapsed. Upon further investigation by employees, they realised they had found a massive arms cache. Over 90 rifles, some sources, the Ulster Herald newspaper in Northern Ireland reported as being 300, and over 2,000 rounds of ammunition. The rifles found in the cellar were the UVF favoured weapons of Lee Enfields and Martini Henrys. Some were stamped for God and Ulster, and they were accompanied by packages of Bible tracts and cap badges. The weapons had belonged to the Loyal Dublin Volunteers. Today, the Loyal Dublin Volunteers are a relatively unknown organisation. Indeed, the Loyal and Orange history of Dublin is largely forgotten. Some actually deem it as being a myth. Loyal and Orange Dublin was most definitely not a myth. Whilst Orange Dublin today is relatively small in number, the headline is not its astronomical decline. The headline is that against all odds and advance and intimidation and murder, it still exists. And not only still exists, but is vibrant and is on a new ascendancy. Thank you.
Folks, I don't know whether you want to pose some questions to